Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Michael, welcome to the show, man.
Adam, nice to be here. Happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Very excited for you to be on and to share your story, to hear it and share it. It's been a long time in the making. So I appreciate you working with me and finding a date finally. Where are you calling in from? Where's home base for you?
So I'm calling in from Monroe, Connecticut, actually, right now.
Awesome.
At our company HQ here with Pella.
Awesome. So we're going to kick off with our first two kind of icebreaker questions. Let's start with, given you have, you said 15 months, one year plus minus firstborn son. If and when he approaches you in a few years from now, tells you he wants to join the service, join the military, what do you do? How do you react?
Yeah, I think that's a huge decision. I don't come from a big military family, actually, so my reasons for joining were really, really self-motivated. And so I think that's the main thing, is understanding his motivations for wanting to join the military. I'd say just flat off the bat, like if he wanted to join the Navy, I'd take serious issue with it and steer him against that for sure. But assuming it's Army or even Air Force, I'd probably have a tough time with. But assuming it's Army, I think it's just about understanding his motivations and that it's truly self-motivated. It's a big thing. I was a West Point grad. I'll get into that, but I did some congressional interviews a few weeks ago for candidates that want to go to service academies for Jim Hines District here around Fairfield, Connecticut. And it's really key to make sure that kids are not being motivated by their parents, to go and want to go to a service academy and more importantly lead troops in the armed forces. So I think making sure that it's obviously self-motivated and it's for the right reasons. He understands, that there's, some very serious implications, if we're at war or, we could go to war and, what that means. But I think assuming his head's in the right place, I'd definitely be supportive of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very well thought out answer. It sounds like you've thought about that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if my wife would say the same thing right now. She probably wouldn't, but that's my answer,
Yeah, totally with you. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Next question, we're going to do, naturally when veterans join civilian workforce or just civilian life, generally speaking, service members to veterans, there is cultural gap and vice versa. How do you see us better bridging that gap moving forward?
Yeah, it's a pretty broad question. I think just from my perspective, transitioning into business, as opposed to engineering or another field, you could transition into from the military. I think there's just a ton of really great transition programs out there for. One program I participated in, maybe I'll talk about it a little later, is American Corporate Partners, where they, pair you with transitioning veterans. They'll pair you with a corporate mentor in the field that you want to break into. And so at the time, I wanted to break into investment banking and was paired with a really great, senior investment banker from Goldman Sachs. And it was really impactful for me. He just I was fresh out of the Army, a few months out of the Army, and getting to talk with this guy in a no threat environment, no judgment environment was really helpful. So I think those transition programs are really helpful. And then, I think as far as, I guess, civilians in general and being more accepting of veterans, I think it's like probably the most important, understanding what their experience was. I think people who spent, a lot of time in combat environments have a very different experience than a lot of other veterans. I wasn't in a combat environment, so won't compare my experience. So I think that's an important consideration. It's also like time how long they've been out as well, too. Someone who's just gotten out 6 months before, and had a few, combat tours, I think you've got to be a lot more patient and understanding, on average, for someone, in that particular situation versus, someone who, just had a different experience and is 10 years out, So I think our veterans, that are just getting out in that first kind of six to 12 months, they can be a little bit more delicate, emotionally or mentally, depending on their experience. So it's important to have patience and understanding. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
think transition programs are super helpful, and I feel like there's more and more I see on LinkedIn and hear about every day. And kind of patience and understanding is important for kind of, general folks out there.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I totally agree. The transition programs are great, especially when they connect, like your experience, right? When they connect you with kind of a shadowing internship, whatever you want to call that, opportunity, so that you get to have like, a foot in the door per se, understand how things work, and, get that cultural kind of mindset shift. So that's a great answer. Awesome, Michael. So we're going to do a life story. Everyone starts with a formal introduction. So I'll kick off with yours. Michael Maniaci began his military career at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he commissioned as a U.S. Army Infantry Officer. Following graduation, he completed Infantry Officer training, Airborne School, and the Army's Elite Ranger School before being assigned to the 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Vilseck, Germany. While with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, Michael served in multiple leadership roles, from rifle platoon leader to troop executive officer, and ultimately regimental command platoon leader. His unit focused on Russian deterrence operations, working across Eastern Europe in multinational NATO training exercises designed to strengthen collective defense. After leaving active duty, Michael earned his MBA from NYU Stern, where he was selected as a Fertitta Military Veteran Fellow. He went on to build a career in investment banking at Credit Suisse and later Raymond James, specializing in building products and distribution, advising on M&A and capital raising transactions across the sector. That experience ultimately led Michael to entrepreneurship. In April of 2025, he and a fellow former Army officer acquired Pella windows and doors of Connecticut and New York, where they now serve as owners and operators of the independent Pella distributorship, serving Connecticut and the Hudson Valley. Most importantly, Michael is a husband and father. Michael, I hope I said your last name right. I know we reviewed it right before we recorded. I got new dad brain though, so please excuse me if I botched it. I'm good at botching names.
No worries. Yeah. Most people get it wrong. It's a tough one to sound out. Yeah. No worries.
All right, cool. So let's kick off where you grew up, childhood, where you grew up, what childhood was like for you, and eventually kind of what led you to service.
Yeah, I grew up mostly in Tampa, Florida. Was originally born in Minnesota, but really mostly grew up around Tampa. Grew up in a suburb, kind of just outside of Tampa proper. Had a really nice, childhood and upbringing. Supportive parents and multiple siblings, and just went to public school. Really enjoyed sports. Worked really hard in high school. Was really focused on academics and sports. Did wrestling and cross country, and that was really where I spent most of my time. It was just academics and sports and clubs. I really just was super focused, and people describe me as an intense kid a lot of times. The word intense was used with me a lot in middle school and high school. But yeah, no, I just super focused in high school. And like I said, all just around in the Tampa area. I think that kind of ultimately focus on academics and sports and leadership in clubs is what kind of led me to West Point too. So I was kind of, like I said, it was that intense kid, super focused, and a lot of people just told me, asked me like, are you thinking of joining the military? And I didn't have, my grandfather served in World War II, but outside of that, I didn't have much military in my family. So it was kind of around junior year of high school that I discovered at West Point. There was a guy that he worked for a private equity firm that bought out a company that my dad was working at. My dad had become pretty good friends with this guy, and this guy was he was a West Point grad, and just on a few occasions, hung out with him and learned a little bit more about West Point and how they grade on academics and a physical grade and a leadership grade, and you're kind of compared against the whole class and ranked on those things. And I thought that was really interesting. And then I started to look more into service and realized I wanted that to be part of my life. So yeah, there was kind of that moment, junior year of high school where I just got dead set on West Point and just thought it'd be the perfect place for me. And just made that kind of my mission in my last 2 years of high school. So yeah, I was able to have a little more fun towards the end of high school. I kind of, once I had gotten into West Point, it's just going out a lot more and enjoying myself. But kind of up through senior year, I was kind of a bit of a nerd. Just books and sports. I don't know. My brother always said that if you're not a nerd if you play sports, which I still believe, and we'll tell my son. But if I didn't play sports, I definitely would have been a nerd.
Yeah, gotcha. I agree.
So,
I agree with your brother's take there.
Yeah. And any sport, as long as you play a sport, and maybe that's not the right thing to say, but yeah, no, I mean overall just a great upbringing.
So it sounds like you getting exposed to your dad's friend was really the ultimate, kind of distinction between being, recognizing service, recognizing West Point, and kind of your trajectory onward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I mean, I saw this guy, and he's been a mentor, honestly, throughout, since junior year of high school to me. I've always, consulted him on major life decisions in terms of business school or, just breaking into investment banking and whatnot. And he's an extremely professional guy. He's, kept himself in great shape. He's had, all these amazing leadership roles in private equity and other things within government too. And just a really impressive guy. His name's Jim Bland. Really, really impressive guy. And yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, I think he would remember that he was kind of my inspiration for West Point. But
cool.
Just thinking back, that was a pretty impactful time for me in high school. And yeah, that led me to West Point.
Cool. And out of curiosity, I always ask when there's any family member who served in World War II. Did your grandfather ever talk to you about his service in any capacity?
He didn't. He passed away before I was born. He had Alzheimer's, unfortunately, and passed away. But there's a really cool tie-in with like how my life has played out in his story. And maybe I'll tie in a little later as it
sure, yeah.
Yeah,
please do.
He was
awesome.
he was just a regular soldier in World War II. Served throughout France and France, but then occupied by Germany. And was served as both an infantry soldier and then later as a military policeman. He got into a bit of trouble. He had a bit of an issue with authority, and they ended up transferring him to the military police as sort of like a punishment, which is it's kind of fun to think about.
That's funny. Yeah. Cool. So walk us through the process of what it was like for you applying to West Point, especially now. Before we were recording, you had mentioned interviewing, right? West Point applicants. So I'm curious to like kind of now hear your perspective in your story when you were applying.
Yeah, it's really it's an interesting process because there's so many different kind of evaluations they they put you through, or I guess, different gates for acceptance. So you have to get you obviously have to get admitted to West Point itself directly. Then there's also a congressional or Senate nomination that you have to get. So all congressmen receive 10 seats that they can nominate to an academy. So all 435, and then 100 senators across the U.S. receive 10 seats each for the academy. So, and then you have to get into the academy itself. So it's kind of two different processes. And for the academy itself, there's like a physical test that you have to take as well too. Pull-ups, and I think it's a 1.5 mile run, and then a basketball throw, which was, from your knees, you have to throw a basketball, as far as you can across like a gymnasium. And I'm just not a very coordinated person. I've always stuck to kind of non coordination needed type sports. So I think I kind of struggled with that one, but I got through it, practiced enough throwing a basketball with my knees. But so you have to do, that physical test, and then, it's kind of, the rest of it is a lot of the same stuff as any regular college application: essays, recommendations. They look at your transcripts, and obviously SAT, ACT. So then there's the congressional part. And so I ended up being I was like 11th on the list for one of my senators in the state of Florida. I was a little disappointed in that, but it's a big state, I guess. And I came up like runner up on that list. But then I got my congressional nomination through my local congressman. So was fortunate to get that. And it can be a little intense for a 17-year-old going to sit and sat with 5 or 6 alumni from West Point, the Naval Academy, and they grill you for like 30-45 minutes. And so I mentioned to you before the call that just helping out with the local academy alumni associations here in Connecticut. I joined Jim Hines' panel to help interview candidates for West Point and Naval Academy, Air Force Academy a few weeks ago. It was just a really surreal process, full circle, and really cool too. There's just it's cool to see young kids like that, 17 years old, that are passionate about serving in the military. You're serving at academies as well. So cool to be on the other side of it. And it's a multi-month process, and I was definitely relieved to get admitted. And I didn't apply to many other schools. I think I just had it. I was dead set on West Point, and I just had like 2 other schools I applied to. Just thinking, once I decided, that was it for me.
Yeah, awesome. It's really cool, full circle to hear for me, and I'm sure especially for you, right? To now be in the chair opposite of the candidates, right? And kind of realize you were there at one point. Moving forward, so obviously there's a big shift in really everything, right? Once you start the academy itself, walk us through what that was like for you.
Yeah, it's a huge shift. I in high school I took all AP and honors classes. I finished high school with like a 4.5. I felt like I was extremely well prepared. But then West Point teaches on, a pretty different, teaching system or kind of learning method than my high school did. And I had a tough time adjusting to it. I didn't get great grades in my first 2 years. I kind of struggled a bit, just to keep up. And within my first 2 years, your first year, you're a plebe, a plebiscite, is like in ancient Roman times, they call it, you're the bottom of the, social pole.
It's just a funny word.
Yeah. It's pretty aggressive.
Yeah, it is.
But, so you're kind of trying to balance, a full course load and kind of this new teaching method, at least for me, and as well as all of these, little chores and duties, that they make the plebes do, delivering laundry to the upperclassmen in a certain fashion, these drill, putting on a uniform and going out and drilling and practicing for parades, which at the time it just seems like kind of such BS that you have to go out and put on, this 200-year-old uniform and do a little parade. So there's all these other activities that occupy your time. And, when I didn't just have time to just do academics and sports, and there's all these other, little things that occupy your time, it can be an awakening for some people, and so I learned a lot about myself and time management and trying to be more efficient yeah, it was tough. I mean, honestly, even by the end of my second year, I had really looked at leaving West Point. I had applied to some other schools. I had a tough time, and it didn't help that I got into trouble too. So that, if anything related to alcohol at West Point, you get what's called like an alcohol board. You go and, anything, related to alcohol. And so some friends and I, we were drinking in New York City, and, we basically got caught. I won't go into all the details, but, you're not supposed to do that. And so you have to go and stand in front of, the brigade tactical officer, who's a full-bird colonel. And, they typically give you a lot of what's called marching tours. So you just have to, I ended up with like 80 hours. And you have to go you put on a uniform. It's Friday afternoon or Saturday morning. You put on a uniform, and, it has to be like a spotless uniform. And you bring your rifle out there, and you just walk back and forth for hours. You can do like 2 or 3 on Fridays, and then 5 on Saturdays. And then if you if a break is coming up, like for me when it happened, spring break was coming up, so you have to stay all of spring break and just walk every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's it's tough. I mean,
For sure.
For something where you're at another school and that's just a frat party, like that's just normal stuff, having some beers with your friends as like a sophomore. But there, you're punished kind of severely. So yeah, by the end of that second year, it was kind of tough academically, and got into trouble, obviously, which sucked, and lost my spring break. But I decided to, what it is if you come back for the third year, that's when you commit to the 5 years active duty and 3 years in reserve. So that's really when you're signing your commitment. It's basically when you come back and show up for the third year. And I guess I kind of lucked out. I just had like a great summer between second and third year. I did, a couple things at West Point, and then ended up, they have this cadet leadership training program where you follow around a second lieutenant in the real Army for like a month. Very cool. So I requested to go to like Fort Campbell or Fort Bragg, with the infantry or field artillery. And they didn't give me my choices at all. They sent me to an ordnance unit in South Korea. So it was kind of, very different than what I wanted. And a lot of people wanted to go to Korea, for a month because it, it's probably going to be a lot of fun. And so I ended up going to Korea and, learned a lot about the Army and how things actually work. But also had a good time. So I think maybe, some of that was, the Army's not so bad, especially being stationed abroad. This is, right. It's a lot better in the real Army than at West Point, which is totally true. So I ended up signing up, going back my third year, and just had a much better second 2 years, ended up getting like nearly straight A's for a few semesters, really improved my GPA, and really enjoyed it a lot more. That's great. In a big way, in my last year, I did a semester exchange to the Chilean Military Academy, so down in Chile. And that was, it's kind of tough to say, but that was probably my best semester at West Point was at the Chilean Military Academy, because it was just a truly one of a kind experience. It was a 6-month semester exchange. So there was, not just academics with their military academy, but also military training. So I ended up doing probably about 2 months out of that 6 was training with their army and their cadets. And that was just really cool. Even 13, 14 years later, I still have, a group of friends down there, that I still chat with and we'll see over the years. So that was just really cool. Cause you go down to Chile and you discover, their army is operating with far fewer resources than our military. There was a training exercise. We went out for a couple days, in kind of a desert, / forest environment, not too far from the military academy. And, we set out. It was kind of a couple days. You're just out with your ruck and kind of a light infantry type of exercise, patrols and, mock ambushes and raids and stuff. And I just remember at one point on the march, it was kind of getting to be evening, and we're planning to get to like the next stop, like the next day, like the next morning or something like that. And I drank all of my water. I ran out of water, and I think I was kind of used to being at West Point where like we're gonna find more water. There's a water buffalo somewhere nearby. We'll get more. And I just remember telling whoever was in charge, like, yeah, I ran out of water. Just want to let you know. And they're like Ringo, you drank up your water. Like you shouldn't have done that. Like no water until tomorrow. Like you didn't plan well. You should have rationed that water. And it was just really a good reminder to not even just resource allocation, but maybe how other countries approach training, and just their mentality and looking at training and just how it prepares you for like a real world scenario, So yeah, just made some great friends there, and just really added to my overall perspective of the world, but even the Army. And so, I think one big takeaway from there was just their passion, for being in the military and how they looked at the U.S. Army. And before, when I got to Chile, I was dead set on being a field artillery officer. And I had to submit my preference while I was in Chile to West Point on my top branch. And I was dead set on field artillery. And there was one night that I spent with one of my classmates. And he just, we were having a couple piscolas. They drink pisco down there and mix it with Coca-Cola. It's a delightful drink, and had a lot of fun with folks down there. But so having some piscos, and he's telling me he's just showing me this passion for how he'd love to be an American infantry soldier, and how that's just sort of the tip of the spear, and kind of like the coolest thing he could do in his life would be to be, an American infantry soldier, infantry officer, just being in the U.S. infantry. And how it's like, it's really, there's infantry and then there's infantry support. And all the other branches are really supporting the infantry. Like the infantry is the main fighting force of the Army. We just had this deep discussion about that. I just saw his passion, and from that I thought more about it, and I made infantry my first choice back at West Point because of that. Just hearing his passion and that infantry and infantry support mentality, like it really resonated with me. So that was a huge takeaway from my time there. And I ended up going back to West Point for my last semester, and had a great semester, and finished off strong academically, which was nice. And from there I ended up commissioning as an infantry officer.
That's awesome. Yeah, I always like to ask West Point grads what their like summer experiences are, and or exchange programs, which you answered. Reason being, it's always just literally just amazing opportunities and experiences that I hear, right? And I like to just promote that because it's such a good program. Obviously, it's very difficult, but nonetheless, you get these unbelievable experiences, like you mentioned, right? Korea and Chile. So very, very cool. Then the next question I was going to ask, right, is how did you end up tracking toward, going the infantry route? Like how or why you decided. So awesome to hear that story. Your two kind of key inspirations, I guess, right? Earlier on in terms of West Point, and then right now, like as you just described, for next steps. So walk us through what it was like graduating West Point, and then where you go from there.
Yeah, graduating West Point. Like I said, I had a strong semester. Finished off strong, and you get 60 days off. After West Point. I spent a lot of that time traveling and just kind of enjoying myself. And then 60 days later, you show up to IBOLC, the Infantry Basic Officers Leaders Course down in Fort Benning, Georgia. And so it was like August of 2013, I guess. So started there, and call it out. Just interestingly enough, my first platoon, my training platoon at IBOLC, was where I met my current business partner in Pella today.
Awesome.
So yeah, cool story. We were both in the same class, and his name's Miles Kerwin. I just remember sitting with Miles, and just became friends through the infantry officer course, and then later went through Ranger school together, and just became friends. But it's kind of funny, over a decade later, we're in this window and door business together.
Totally.
So funny how that works. But no, IBOLC, the infantry officer course was a great experience. We had a really tough NCO and captain that were kind of drove our training. And the NCO it served in the Ranger Regiment, had multiple combat tours in Ranger Regiment, and they took an approach with us that a shared suffering approach. So they put us through very difficult exercises and kind of punished us with push-up exercises and get on the bus and off the bus drills, a lot.
All the good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. I think it was a good lesson, honestly, in just shared suffering and grit. And that, if you guys aren't doing things the right way, the whole group's going to suffer. You're all going to go through it together. And it made us such a tight-knit, infantry officer platoon. I think our name was the Reapers, and we'd yell Reapers constantly, and we just kind of had this dynamic with our platoon that they kind of created, that really wasn't like any other platoon, officer platoon, in the course. So that was really cool. And then for infantry officers, it's important that you give Ranger School a shot, and the best case is you can get your actually get your Ranger tab. So Ranger School is a separate leadership course after IBOLC, and it's open to the entire Army. But officers, young lieutenants make up a pretty big chunk of Ranger School students. And then you'll have, actual Ranger Regiment soldiers, that are there so they can get their tab and, become NCOs at Ranger Regiment. And then just all sorts of other folks. But it's mostly like young infantry lieutenants. It's really it's a good marker, for an infantry officer to show up to their unit with a Ranger tab. And not all do. It's a tough course. And if you don't make it, it's not saying you're going to be a terrible infantry officer by any means, but it's one of those things where you show up with it or you don't, and people are checking. Your soldiers are checking.
Totally.
So that was the next course after you finish infantry officer school, Ranger school. So it's kind of like I finished infantry officer school in December, and then it was kind of a 6-week get ready for Ranger school and train up.
Okay.
To
so
start.
They give you the opportunity to get ready for it.
They do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of nursing some injuries too, so from IBOLC that I had sustained, so it was good for me to nurse those up a little bit more, and then start around mid-February. And Yeah, the date it's tough to start in the winter too. It's
Yeah.
very cold. We're
Yeah.
talking Fort Benning, Georgia, and then the first phase is in Fort Benning,
Mhm.
about 3 weeks. Then the next phase is in Dahlonega, Georgia, which is kind of up in the mountains in northern Georgia. And then you finish down in the swamps at Eglin Air Force Base in
Mhm.
Florida. And so, to start in February, it's just a lot colder. You burn a lot more calories when you're living outside,
Yep.
for that period of time. But I think you're familiar with Ranger School, right?
Yeah, so I'll ask a few questions, but before Ranger School itself, I'm curious how the transition was, from West Point into infantry officer course, as it relates to, like, I don't know, I guess kind of like holistically, right? Like culturally speaking, or difficulty. Like, were you? Was it just like essentially a continuation, or was there like a shift in, just how you were going about day to day?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it ties the shift from West Point to the regular Army. I think is more dramatic for a lot of folks that go to West Point.
Mm.
But the shift to eyeball, like, it was more. I felt like I had a lot more freedom. I could
Okay,
live
interesting.
in. I lived in a house on base with
Hmm.
with some of my friends, but there was obviously way more freedom than living in the barracks at West Point.
Yeah,
And of course, it's still the Army. You're still going to PT early in the morning, and you've got a schedule. But even just having a car, I didn't even have a car at
mm,
West Point for 4 years. So having a car, I felt like there was a lot more freedom. And
sure.
then you know, a lot of the guys that were in my infantry platoon, officer platoon, were West Point guys. Guys that I had graduated with. So you know, or were super strong, solid ROTC guys.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a continuation in some respects, that now we're just doing military training and just working out all the time, and you're working out with a bunch of high level, super fit guys. So it's which is not like the regular Army.
Right.
Regular Army is not like that. So it was kind of a continuation in some regards, and a lot more freedom, which was
Yeah,
nice.
sure. I mean, yeah, you're also obviously dropping, like, significant just education workload. So I can imagine that plays into the dynamic of, more freedom and just being a lift on that kind of overall process day to day.
Yeah, yeah, one hundred
Cool.
percent.
So rolling into Ranger School, walk us through kind of, I don't know, like a memorable, difficult part in each of the phases.
Yeah, so like I said, there's the bedding phase, which is 3 weeks. It's kind of like flatter terrain. They get a lot of your assessments out of the way, so there's
Mm.
kind of the whole first 4 days is various assessments where they just try to trip you up, with different physical assessments and a water course, things like that, and then kind of more basic, smaller squad level activities. So
Hmm.
group of 10 students, and you have to lead the squad on a patrol. So it's kind of they gradually increase the size, of your leadership,
Hmm.
your leadership of different units. So in the first phase, it's just that squad level tactics. The next phase, you're going to Dahlonega, Georgia, like I was saying, kind of more up in the mountains in northern Georgia, and then you're at platoon level operations. So you have a leadership role where you could be a squad leader of another 10 students, or up to 40 students, at the platoon level, and you're going out on these 5 to 10 day exercises where you're hiking up mountains and setting up raids in ambushes, and just really just platoon level operations, as if you're forward deployed, in a mountainous environment. And it's really trying. I think mountains was where I was definitely tried more,
Yeah.
especially in March. It's really cold.
Yeah.
You just burn a ton of calories. I think by the end of the mountain phase, I had lost 35 pounds, from
Yeah.
going in there. So, over 5, 6 weeks, 35 pounds, so it's a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest part is it's kind of just a suck fest,
Hmm.
and just a test of grit. Certainly a test of leadership, because you've got all these other people that are, hungry and sleep deprived and kind of mentally and emotionally pushed, and you've got to lead them and get them to do things. And, they don't want to, they want to sleep, or find out a way to get more, get more food. So it's tough. I failed that phase the first time. You can fail for different reasons. And, I'd been caught too many times falling asleep, and I think I didn't shave one day. They want you to shave in like the 30-degree weather with you're in the woods and you've got to shave. I mean, it's tough. So I had enough negative spot reports that I failed, the first attempt. And you can fail each phase for a different reason once, but you can't fail for the same reason, twice. So it's like spot reports or failing your leadership patrol, where you're the assigned leader for 24 hours, or peer evaluation. So there's kind of different ways you can fail. And it just so happened to be that the time I failed was when the school was going to shut down for 5 weeks. So right after I finished that mountain phase, they shut down for what's called the best ranger competition. And the whole ranger staff, they all go back to Fort Benning and prepare for the competition, which is kind of a big Army competition, and they just don't run the school. And so it was kind of interesting because I just sat there in the mountains, and that was where my friend Miles, he also had failed that same phase, and so we ended up being bunkmates for those 5 weeks, and so got to know each other even better, just obviously hanging out each day. And I remember he and I we would talk through and kind of plan out like how we were going to be better for the next phase. I remember specifically we'd go off to the side and kind of try to think of ways and different things we could make to put ourselves in a better position to pass the next time. So it was kind of a cool dynamic. We were both similarly motivated, and cool. Ended up starting the mountain phase the next time 5 weeks later. So at that point I'd been there 8 weeks, passed the second time through, luckily. But it was close. One of my leadership patrols just turned out to be a total mess. I led like a group of 40 people the wrong direction. We ambushed like the wrong site. But luckily I had, other leadership patrols that, I could, I succeeded at. So got through that phase, got through the mountain phase, and Miles did too. And then we both went on to the Florida phase, the swamp phase, and luckily got through that as well. But definitely a life experience. I mean, I remember in the Florida phase, I've never hallucinated before from being so tired. And, it's the kind of thing where you're just marching in the middle of the night. You've been up, like 48 hours or whatever, and you're marching in the middle of the night through sand, and you start seeing stuff, out in the woods, and you're seeing oh, that's the camp? We're back at camp. This is great. You see some building, and then, you kind of shake yourself too, and like, there's nothing there. It's really by the end, the last phase, you're really pushed. And so yeah, I was just, happy to get through that. And, you're kind of keeping in the back of your mind the whole time that, I've got to get this tab, I've got to have this Ranger tab, you literally wear it on your uniform, on your shoulder. And so, everyone sees. And so it was really motivating to get through it. And I mean, honestly, just having spent so much time there and having lost so much weight and being so sleep deprived, and probably aged myself a few years, there was no going back. I had to get it,
Absolutely.
So finished the Florida phase, and it was great to have that done.
Is it different for officers that are going? Because like you were an officer right before starting Ranger School. So is it different if you're an officer or if you're not an officer going through it?
No, not at all. There's no difference. At least I didn't see a difference. I mean, I think everyone knew, what rank everyone else was, but
Hmm.
at least, the way I treated it was just, everyone was completely equal, had an equal shot.
Yeah.
I think the one thing was where some of the ranger instructors, if they knew they had a staff sergeant, in the mix, and it was kind of questionable whether that person was going to pass or not, they might nudge them along a little bit more because those were the people that were going to take their job,
Right.
eventually. Because if the staff sergeant got the ranger tab, then he could come back to ranger school and teach, and they would just
Hmm.
assign them back to ranger school. So I think there was always a little bit of a dynamic there, but
Sure.
as far as kind of regular soldiers or Ranger Regiment folks or officers, I thought they were pretty consistent in
Hmm.
grading everyone equally. Did you pass your leadership patrols? Did you have too many spot reports? These types of things. It's a good question, though, because you could
Yeah.
see maybe how there could be favoritism.
Yeah, yeah. I was imagining like anything that is leadership oriented, for whoever is, running that school, that program, that time, like leaning more heavy on an officer because because of the background, because of the rank.
Hey, I'm sure it happened,
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
sure. For sure. Yeah, and especially, now that I think of it, like senior officers,
Hmm.
maybe folks that were captains, they'd failed the school when they were lieutenant and then coming back years later as a
Sure,
captain. You could see some instances where there's almost a higher scrutiny, on those folks
sure.
because they were going to take, higher levels of, higher level leadership positions, go command
Yeah.
a company of maybe 160 soldiers. And, while it was unwritten, maybe there was, some more scrutiny on those
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. I mean,
Which,
you would think it makes sense in that kind of a dynamic, to some degree, right?
right. Because, I was going to lead a platoon of 40 soldiers, but,
Right.
a captain, they're going back to the infantry and, leading a company. It is a different level of authority.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Cool. So, for anyone listening who's going to start or aspiring to go through Ranger School, what's your advice for them?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I'd say prepare. I prepared a lot, just mentally and just going into it. Like I'd ruck march, a
Mm.
lot. I wasn't very good at rucking, in the infantry officer course. I got through everything and got decent times on my ruck marches, but that was one that I did a lot of in that like
Hmm.
6 week train up, and I think it helped me, because
Yeah.
that's like the number one physical activity you're doing all day in ranger schools. You're carrying a really heavy pack,
Hmm.
sometimes up to 100 pounds with ammunition, and you're hiking up mountains and going up steep inclines and doing it, late at night in the middle of the night at 4 a.m., rucking around. So I think ruck marching is key, because
Hmm.
the less tired you are, the cooler you can be, after 3 days of carrying a heavy ruck, the more clear you're going to think, and
Hmm.
the easier it'll be, to get through the school. So I guess, preparing, but specifically getting good at ruck marching is
Hmm.
maybe the number one feedback.
Yep. Yep. Totally makes sense. Awesome.
Mhm.
So, you graduate Ranger School. What's that like, and where do you go next from there?
Yeah, was able to also sneak in airborne school.
Hmm.
So I'd done air assault school, rappelling from helicopters at West Point. In airborne school, it's obviously parachuting, basic parachutist course. So was able to get that in as well after Ranger school, but it's a pretty straightforward course.
Hmm.
It's 5 basic jumps. It's kind of the most basic parachutist course you can do in the Army. So did that for 3 weeks, and and then after that, I kind of just prepared to go to my unit. So I went to the Second Cavalry Regiment over in Germany. That's where I was assigned.
What,
So.
when did you know what you were going to do?
Hmm?
Like, at what point did you know where you were going to get assigned?
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, my story was a little unique, where I was actually assigned to 4th ID, the 4th Infantry Division, over in Colorado, originally out of West Point. And then I'd been notified during infantry school that my brigade was being deactivated, which was kind of unusual.
Yeah, it's
For this
weird.
course. It's like picking up going to Colorado, and my brigade at the time was being deactivated. And so I was kind of, thinking, where am I going to go next? And there was a guy in my infantry officer platoon, the training platoon, that he was assigned to Germany, and they ultimately, he and his wife were going to have a baby, and he wanted to go back to Bragg, Fort Bragg in North Carolina, because it's where he had some family. And so kind of did this interesting three-way trade where they let me, because my unit was deactivated, they let me like pick North Carolina, and then I traded with him for Germany. So yeah, it's like an interesting series of events. But yeah, so I didn't know I was going to go to Germany until basically right before Ranger School.
Okay.
Yeah, I found out, found a new unit. But yeah, I could have easily gone somewhere else stateside, but the chips just kind of fell where they did, and no, I'm glad they did. So yeah, I knew a couple months before Ranger School, and yeah, got to Germany. It was overall just an amazing experience being there. Kind of a different mission set. I mean, I think one thing I was initially a little disappointed with was when I got to my unit, they had just gotten back from their Afghanistan deployment like 5-6 months before that. And so they had, kind of already done all their R&R, and they were just, excited to hang out, for the time being. And because the unit was in Germany, there was more of a broader mission set centered around Russian deterrence operations. It was called Operation Atlantic Resolve. And that was kind of a broader mission set for all of the units that were in Europe. So the 173rd in Vicenza, Italy participated. 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Vilsack, Germany participated in some other units as well. And they would actually send units over from the U.S. to go participate in this operation. And it really centered on partnering with our NATO partners throughout Eastern Europe in training exercises, and kind of, I think in a big way, kind of a show of force that, the U.S. was partnering with these countries in, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Poland, Georgia, and there were literally U.S. troops on the ground in those countries. So training, but also, interesting in the sense that like there's troops on the ground in these countries. If Russia were to invade, that's makes it complicated for them. It's sort of like the U.S. is here too. So really interesting mission set, and training exercises, and yeah, so I got to the unit. It was kind of like trying to find a place for myself. I really wanted a platoon. That's the number one job you do as an infantry lieutenant, is you want to become a platoon leader, where you're that young lieutenant that's kind of in charge. I say, I think the NCOs run the army, but you're the young lieutenant that's in charge on paper. Of a group of 40 NCOs and soldiers, and I got there, spent a couple months in the operations section, and was lucky after kind of just 2.5 months, an opportunity opened up to go and take a platoon. So they were in Estonia at the time doing a mission set with the Estonian army. So I flew over to Estonia and met them and introduced myself, and took over a platoon at that time. Cool. And then basically spent. Yeah.
What does that kind of like process look like? It's just simply, the position opened up and you apply for it, or like how does that in a literal sense work?
Well, yeah, in this case, there's some details to it. So unfortunately, another lieutenant was being relieved of his position. So kind of an interesting set of circumstances. I won't get into, why he was relieved, right. But where, not necessarily the best circumstance to jump into, where the old leader is, kind of being what was relieved was pushed out. And so I was there to replace him. the other lieutenant he had a few months left on his time, but
Mm.
you never want to finish like that. So, kind of sucked for him. I felt for him. But yeah, so, opened up because someone else was relieved.
Yeah. And then you just like apply, you just put yourself out there saying you want it, or they signed you.
They assign you, yeah.
Oh, they signed you.
Yeah, because
Cool.
it's really a natural path for a young infantry
Mm.
officer in the Army. You really want to get into that platoon leader position
Right.
as soon as possible. And it just
Yeah.
depends on staffing and capacity and where people are at in their timelines. Some folks can wait, to a year
Sure.
in the operations section, kind of just as a staff officer, waiting for a platoon to open up.
Mm.
But I was lucky, to get into one in just 2.5 months. So yeah, we spent about another month in Estonia, doing a little bit of training, but kind of mostly closing down their exercise. They'd been there several months, and then got back to Germany. And the main focus was training up for the annual kind of deployment readiness validation exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So
Before moving into that, when you took control or ownership, whatever the right word is there for you, of that platoon in Estonia, like walk us through what it's like to, it's a difficult situation, even if it wasn't someone getting pushed out or some off thing, like nonetheless you still gotta earn trust and connections with that platoon, with the team. It's like, walk us through what that was like for you and how you went through taking control, taking ownership.
Yeah, it's a really good point to pause on for a minute, because this is where I think I learned some lessons,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of made some mistakes initially. Was I was bringing that like West Point mentality,
Mm-hmm.
where West Point's kind of a little like utopia in a sense, where you've got like a ton of these high performers, and they're held to these really high standards physically and academically. And that's just not the reality, in the Army. And I think I had too high of standards initially, when I took over my platoon, and maybe even a little too much confidence, coming from Ranger School, and I guess being at West Point too, where I had probably a little too much confidence and bravado, and kind of came in hot, where this is my platoon now,
Yeah.
and kind of felt the need to assert myself, and learn some lessons, I'd say, within those first 3 to 6 months, where working with my platoon sergeant, who's kind of the my right hand man, and the NCO lead for the platoon, and kind of bringing me down to earth a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, on some things, and not being having not realistic expectations, but expectations that worked,
Yeah.
for the platoon, and gradually improving physical performance and other standards, but not expecting the world right away.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a common theme with a lot of West Point officers, or guys that had just finished Ranger School, coming in expecting a little too much, and you know, uh, being borderline arrogant, So it was a good humbling experience for me, because what I was doing wasn't working, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't creating, the right culture.
Yeah.
And it was humbling for sure.
It's easy, like West Point or whatever the background aside. I think it's easy to come in, like it could be civilian leadership role. Like you're coming in as a manager of people, you're coming in hot because you're like all excited and whatever it is, and you gotta have to level yourself out with whoever's there because they're not necessarily gonna have the same energy. So I mean, it's like I think it's very relatable to anyone listening who's ever been in coming in new as a leadership position, regardless of like background or what. So yeah, I just like to hear it and how you kind of maneuvered around that or
Yeah, yeah. And you get more comfort over time, but it's challenging too. I was 23 years old,
yeah,
and put in this leadership role of a 40-person unit.
overseas.
Many combat veterans. All of
Mm-hmm.
my squad leaders and my platoon sergeant, all had multiple tours, in
Mm-hmm.
Iraq or Afghanistan. And, here I am, this, 23-year-old guy, just fresh from West Point in Ranger school. It was humbling, spending more time with them and, taking their advice more and, making a lot of mistakes in those first 6 months. That was, really where I learned the most, listening to those NCOs and taking their advice and, balancing it out, of course, with what, needed to be done. But, it was a humbling experience for sure. So I'd say, there was that month-long training exercise, which was big. You're kind of out there for like 20 days doing a like mock deployment. You're out in the field and conducting, different training exercises. And we were a striker combat vehicle unit. So this is where the cavalry comes, and 2nd Cavalry. It's kind of it's a tank sort of on 8 wheels, like kind of like a light tank. And it has either a Mark 19 grenade launcher or a 50 cal machine gun on the top. But it's a kind of this, light maneuver vehicle unit. So that was kind of nice too. It was, you're traveling around in a striker as opposed to carrying, a heavy rucksack. But, a whole set of nuances to, the vehicle's breaking down and you've got to do maintenance and, it's very different setting up security with 4 strikers, as opposed to a platoon of 40 guys. It can be kind of more complex, in some situations. So, I learned a lot on that training exercise. And, I spent about 9 months as a platoon leader. And, I don't think I think I could have done a lot better, but, the powers that be above me, wanted to promote me to a troop executive officer. So it's really the second in command of a company or a troop. So roughly 100 to 150 soldiers. That was more of a kind of a focused on logistics, logistics for the company and, operational planning for the company, and then stepping up when the commander is away. So the commander being, a more senior captain who's gone through, usually, 5 to 7 years of experience in the Army. So, being the second in the command of them and focused on the logistics and planning and operations. So that was a really fulfilling role, but not as much fun as being a platoon leader.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
The leadership and being down there, working directly with a group of guys is
totally.
That's the fun stuff.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So what was the, because I kind of paused you and we took a step back, what was the kind of in order, like how your promotions occurred? Where I paused you, I think it was you were doing a readiness exercise at large. Yeah.
You mean within the platoon leader time?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like, continuing in chronological order of where kind of I paused you, which is I think you were about to start. You're coming back from that Estonia deployment to, I guess, Germany, and then.
Yeah, exactly. The platoon leader time, it ended up being kind of short, because an opening opened up for an executive officer role. So, had that month or two in Estonia where we finished up the exercise. I was kind of on the tail end of it. We had that month or two later, we had that month-long training exercise, in southern Germany, where, I'm sure, a lot of military listeners of the show would understand, those kind of deployment readiness validation exercises that you do. It's called the date rotation that we did in southern Germany. Came back from that, and since our mission was really Russian deterrence focused, and they had just gotten back from this, this time over in Estonia, it was more focused on training and kind of, run of the mill, maybe go out to the field for 1 to 2 weeks, to do some live fire exercises or other stuff or land navigation, but kind of, standard infantry platoon training, for that last like 5 months or so. just kind of too bad, you know. I mean, there's other platoon leaders or other officers in the unit that got to be platoon leaders in Afghanistan, you know, just like 8 months before, you know, I got there. And but you know, the timing the way it works out and shifting priorities and the new mission set, that was just, you know, the way it worked for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of you know, standard run of the mill training for the rest of my time as a platoon leader.
So then does that bring you to the end of Germany deployment?
No. So I was stationed in Germany.
Okay, yeah.
So I was there. Yeah. So I was there. I ended up being there almost 4 years
Oh
across, you know,
wow,
the
yeah.
different positions that I held. Yeah. So, like I said, I ended up going on to be an executive officer. And then, you know, after my time as a troop executive officer, worked in operations a bit, which is kind of the least fun part
Yeah.
about being like an infantry officer. I think where a lot of people, you know, end up getting out is you end up spending a lot of time on staff and in these operations roles and
Yeah.
planning roles. And you know, over a 20-year career, you can end up spending maybe 5 or 6 years of it actually in leadership roles. You know, if you're lucky, you know, and you're progressing well enough. So yeah, I didn't like the operation stuff as much. You know, it wasn't quite as fun. I think I had about a year or so in operations after the executive officer time, and kind of, you know, anything from daily operations, you know, across the unit or across the base to helping plan, you know, weapons ranges and you know, just ensuring the companies and the unit were adhering to certain standards and stuff. Um, Not that much fun.
Yeah.
Then by the end, it was kind of like, you know, a year or so before I was gonna you know, have finish my 5-year commitment. Had been tapped for very long title, the Regimental Mobile Command Post Platoon Leader, which other people would probably know better as the TAC PL. There's a platoon leader that is essentially the security detail for the brigade commander. So in this case, it was a regimental commander, and he was the colonel that was in charge of, or ultimately responsible for, you know, the 4,500 people in our unit. And, you know, because of his status, he had his own platoon. You know, it was a smaller platoon of like roughly like 15 to 20 soldiers, and you know, in a platoon leader. But really cool. So I was tapped to do that. You know, working directly for the colonel, the brigade commander on the post, and that was a lot of fun because you're kind of, you know, you're completely on your own. You've got a lot of autonomy. You know, there's certain things that training exercises or you know, places that the brigade commander needs to be, but outside of that, you know, I as a platoon leader had way more autonomy. So at that point, being a senior lieutenant, and at one point, you know, junior captain doing that role, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know, there was one 3-month summer exercise we did where, as a unit, we drove from Germany, kind of through Czech Republic and Romania and Slovakia, several other countries, to basically drive through a lot of our, you know, NATO countries, our NATO partners countries, in a kind of a joint march and stopping to do training along the way. And we went from Germany all the way down to Georgia. So I actually, you know, put all of the vehicles of the unit, you know, on boats and sent them across in Georgia, and just did a bunch of really cool exercises, you know, training exercises across all those countries. So spent a couple weeks in Romania, a couple weeks in Bulgaria, and then finished it off with this really big exercise that had like 20 different NATO partners in Georgia, where, you know, just all sorts of, you know, cool stuff around Georgia. And yeah, that was a lot of fun, really cool exercise, you know, camping out in, you know, in kind of the countryside in Romania. And then, you know, a week later, we're in some Bulgarian barracks and then Georgian barracks. So just something really fun to be a part of. And kind of that was kind of toward the end of my time as the TAC PL role with him. So with the brigade commander. And then
So were you really in that capacity? Were you really moving around just as like 20 people plus minus in all of these?
no, so yeah, this was an exercise where it wasn't the entire unit, but there was probably maybe 1,000 people from the
Mhm.
unit that were moving across all these different countries and
Mhm.
literally driving the Stryker vehicles like on the highway.
Yeah.
Um, which is kind of fun in its own
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You worry that you're gonna nick a car or something, but no, it's really cool because I'm
Yeah.
standing in the top of the vehicle the whole time, just like head out, because that's
Yeah.
where the vehicle commander or the platoon leader would stand, and just going through like beautiful countryside in
Yeah.
Romania or or wherever we were driving through.
Mhm.
So pretty cool, and then having to coordinate with all these Eastern European partners who mostly didn't speak English, so
Mhm.
having to figure that out and make it work. All really fun, good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Sounds like a great shift from the operations role and then kind of leading toward the end of your service there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and so yeah, I really finished that up, and then finished up that exercise, finished that roll up, and then at that point had just decided that I didn't like the staff time. That kind of
Mhm.
put a sour taste in my mouth,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I just saw I saw a career in front of me where there'd be a lot of time on staff, and I'd kind of done a lot of the most fun roles that I wanted to.
Yeah.
So I made the decision to just finish at the 5 year mark, the 5 years of active duty service, and those last 6 months applied to business schools,
Mhm.
and decided that would be a good transition for me.
Yeah.
Just into the civilian world was business school. So yeah, finished up that TAC PL role, had some time in operations in Germany, and ultimately applied to a few different schools. Got into a couple and ended up going accepting NYU Stern
Mhm.
in New York City.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, that was
how is
really fun.
that? Fellow NYU Stern grad as well.
Yeah,
Though
yeah, that's right.
I didn't go straight from. I did that later in life. Meaning, I went to undergrad straight from service. So different environment, at least to some degree. Though,
Mhm.
I asked this in particular because for me it was very difficult to be in a school environment right after finishing. How was that like for you, and how did you kind of uh, you know well, I should ask also even before this question, how much time did you have between actually finishing and starting school?
Very little time. It was a couple weeks
Yeah.
actually. So I
Okay.
finished in
Yeah. So,
June. Yeah,
so,
I
so what was
yeah,
that
which
like?
was
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was not by choice, but just with like the way when the MBA program started.
Yeah.
Really great at NYU. They have this Fertitta veteran scholarship at
Hmm.
NYU, where the Fertitta brothers, more well known for UFC and
Hmm.
having pretty big ownership stake in UFC and doing some other things too. They're billionaires, and they donated money to NYU Stern, the business school, for veterans to earn a 50% tuition scholarship.
Hmm.
And part of the program as well is where the all the veterans start a cohort. They start a couple months before regular classes start.
Hmm.
So as opposed to starting in August, you start in June, and you get a couple classes knocked out, and then all the veterans get to do kind of some tours of different industries to explore
Hmm.
different industries, on a few different Fridays. So really great program,
Great program.
Yeah, hats off to NYU Stern and the Fertitta brothers
Hmm.
for putting that program in place. So I started, I finished my time in Germany, and it was like late May, first week of June, and then a few weeks later in June started the Fertitta program.
Hmm.
But it was cool because it was just a group of I think like 20-25 veterans,
Awesome.
Army, Air Force, Navy. We were all just together.
That's a big group. Yeah.
Started.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no Stern. Stern has a good emphasis on veterans. I'm sure, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
different clubs and also just prioritizing veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was thankful to have that program. I think I took statistics and accounting,
Mm-hmm.
first over that summer, and just got to knock those out.
Yeah.
And then I think it was, essentially a little lighter course load the first year.
Yeah.
So just a great program. Got to explore a couple different industries over the summer. We toured some startups, investment banks, consulting firms. So that helped a lot because I think if I maybe would have just gone right into the classroom with, a group of, 100 or 150 other MBA students that were, previously consultants or investment bankers,
Yeah.
it would have been,
Yeah.
a different experience.
Yeah. That's an awesome transition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Did,
did
did
you did the MBA program?
yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Did
Yeah.
did sorry, I was in the middle of a headspace of a question. Did
Sorry.
did
Yeah.
you did you overlap like that program that you had mentioned where you met oh, unless that was earlier. I don't know if I'm confusing things. Like no, I think it was your transition program, right? Was that included with the NYU program where you did
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
good point. I mentioned this earlier. Yeah, American Corporate Partners.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
a nonprofit that helps veterans, pairs veterans with mentors in the
Right.
corporate world in the field that they're looking to get into. And so
Right.
I discovered that program, I think also through NYU,
Mm,
and ultimately, enrolled in the program and was paired with. I had decided, over that summer that I thought investment banking would be a good fit for me. Initially after business school, so I decided I was going to set out to recruit for investment banking
mm-hmm.
that first fall semester at NYU. And I was paired up with a guy who had been at Goldman Sachs in the investment banking division for like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Great guy, Joe Zaluka, and met with him like every week for a few months,
Mm,
just around the city, or we have calls and just kind of pick his brain about the career path, and he'd give me advice on interviews. So it was really helpful.
cool.
That was when I had decided investment banking be a good career path, and at least a place where I wanted to spend a handful of years. You know, versus doing something else. I really just immersed myself that first semester.
Awesome.
I'm sure you know about like investment banking recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Especially at Stern, it's a very regimented process
Mm-hmm.
that Stern organizes, which is great. Just in terms of the number of different investment banks that come to the campus, and also you're right there in the heart of in West Village,
Yeah.
good proximity to a lot of banks. So spent those first kind of 5 months at Stern, taking classes, but number one priority was getting a job,
Yeah.
internship in investment
Right.
banking. Um, so yeah, I was just going to different networking events
Mm-hmm.
nonstop. They kind of have these like phased rounds where it could be as much as like 6 rounds where you go to different events and have these coffee chats with bankers, and they sort of eliminate more and more people within each round. And yeah, by the end of it, I was lucky. I had like 9 interviews and finished with a couple offers
Nice.
to investment banks. And yeah, I ended up choosing Credit Suisse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, rest in peace, Credit Suisse.
Mm-hmm.
But get into that later. But yeah, I ended up finishing my first year. Did an internship at Credit Suisse in their industrials group, in their industrials investment bank. So kind of covering all companies across the industrial sector,
Mm-hmm.
with a focus on advising M&A advisory. So companies, buying and selling themselves. So bankers, giving advice on those transactions. And then equity and debt capital markets. So companies raising equity or selling actual shares of the company to raise money, and then debt capital markets, and then what they call leverage finance, which was kind of like non-investment grade um, debt raising. So yeah, it was an interesting summer, I guess. Speaking to kind of like the military to civilian transition,
Yeah.
I felt like that summer was pretty was tough for me. It was a great enriching summer, but I was I was an infantry officer who had gone through a year of business school, but was not a Excel and PowerPoint guy, used to cranking out financial models. So I just remember doing so many things wrong that summer, and some of the junior bankers who were kind of my bosses over the summer, just giving me some relatively harsh feedback at points, like don't send me a PowerPoint over email, send me a PDF, like don't do that again. Just kind of basic stuff that you don't know in the corporate world. But it ended up being a great experience. I learned a ton. It's interesting, kind of. I think one of the key experiences, or just one of the key traits that veterans have, in breaking into high careers with really strong requirements, like banking, is just grit. I think between just West Point, being an infantry officer, Ranger School, those things, like really, you get through that stuff, you've got to have some level of grit. I might not be the smartest or the most technical in some aspects, but all those experiences in the military really taught me grit, and just working hard enough and grinding through something, and just trying again and again, and just not letting yourself get down. That's what helped me get through that summer, because it's a lot of hours. Investment banking's known for just a ton of hours, and so I was putting in maybe 80 hours a week, as an investment banker. 80 hours a week in front of a computer screen. It's very different than working out a couple times a day as an infantry officer, and shooting guns with the boys. It's a very different experience. But yeah, got through that summer and was lucky enough to get a full-time offer to go back to Credit Suisse, and ultimately finished up my second year at Stern. Was lucky enough to do a semester exchange program to London Business School. So that was really fun. It kind of plays into my story overall, because while I was at London Business School, I discovered the search fund model. I think you're familiar with search funds, but it's essentially the concept of a young entrepreneur raising money, or searching for a small company to acquire and operate themselves, and raising money to get the deal done, and then ideally growing that company, and either exiting or holding on to the company in perpetuity. So I learned about search funds actually at London Business School, and there was a point where I considered not accepting my Credit Suisse full-time offer to go to Credit Suisse, and launching a search. There was some other guys that from West Point I talked to that had gone just right after business school, regular Army, West Point regular Army business school, and just gone right to launching a search fund, where they were essentially just searching for a company for a year or two, finding a small one to buy and raising some money and operating it. But that seemed crazy to me, to at least me personally, like not having any corporate experience or any outside of the Army experience. So I became really passionate about search funds and this idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition, in buying a small company and operating it. But I kind of kept it in the back of my mind, and just carried on my path. So went back to Credit Suisse, and had a great couple of years there, but a really trying couple of years too. I started in the summer of 2020, so it was just a few months into COVID, and obviously it was super uncertain times, but ended up being just record-breaking years in the financial markets, obviously, with interest rates coming down, the stock market booming to record highs, and that translated into just booming, record-setting years for investment banking. So a really cool time to be in investment banking. My first 18 months was like a record all-time year for the market and for Credit Suisse. So kind of backtracking a little bit,
Pretty
like
wild.
starting in banking, that was a big transition.
Mm-hmm.
Being in a school environment where things are kind of moving in slow motion to, okay, it's July 2020. You're an investment banking associate, and you've got 5 deals you're working on right
Mm-hmm.
now. That was tough.
For sure, yeah.
Not being as fast on a computer, not being a pro at financial modeling and putting presentations together for trying to raise money for companies or sell companies. It was a struggle, but
Yeah.
I definitely go back to that grit.
Yeah.
It's just about nugging it out.
That's really tough. And I'll also add, like, to your credit is, usually people are getting into those roles after doing 4 years of internships on through undergrad, so they're kind of like embedded in the system, right? So like they know all these like little nuances, like you were kind of mentioning, which end up adding a lot to easing their efforts or just understanding of culture, how things work, or just use of Excel, for example. So that's not easy for you to have jumped in after service, after being rank, right, after being an officer, leading people, teams, etc. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah. So that was actually really where I kind of got into the building products space.
Mm-hmm.
Is there's a period of a few months where you start as an investment banking associate or an analyst, where you're kind of a generalist and you're working
Mm-hmm.
across the whole team. My group was the industrials group, but you had to select a kind of a subgroup
Mm-hmm.
within industrials, and so they had transportation and logistics, they had aerospace and defense. They had kind of a diversified industrials group, which was catch-all for lots of different things. And then they had what they called basic materials, which was building products and chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of an interesting pair. But
Yeah.
those, I'm sure you've never heard of that, like building products
No.
and chemicals groups. That's what they did at Credit Suisse back then. And there was 5 senior bankers, managing directors, and directors that would bring in clients into the bank, and they had teams of associates and VPs and analysts that worked below them. And so you had to, after a period of your first 3 months there, you had to kind of figure out, it was kind of a 2-way matching process where the groups would, figure out who they liked of the new associate analyst class, and then vice versa for the associates and analysts. And just as it happened to work out, I liked that building products and chemicals team a lot. They were doing some really cool deals. They were doing a lot more M&A, which I think is kind of the most interesting work you can do in investment banking, and the most impactful. Like selling a company is usually the biggest event of someone's life for like a founder, or obviously a huge event for a private equity firm too. So they were doing a lot of M&A, and I got along with those folks well. And so I don't think I necessarily consciously thought to get into building products investment banking, but it was kind of the work they were doing and the team that brought me to it. And so while I was there, one of the coolest deals I did was Hunter Douglas, which if you've heard of Hunter Douglas, they're the world's largest window coverings products company. So selling shades, blinds, curtains, and just everything around that too, just everything for windows. And there was the CEO of Credit Suisse at the time had a relationship with the owners of the company. They're a 100-year-old family-owned company. Pretty cool stuff. The owner, the father, he was 92, and he was still kind of the main CEO and chairman of
That's wild.
the company. Yeah, the Sonnenberg family, kind of like a Dutch, long-term pseudo royal family, I would say. And they had the two sons, Marco and David, that were kind of co-CEOs under the father, but the father still with a strong grip over the business. And
Wild.
and this was they were a $4 or $5 billion revenue company, nearly $1 billion of EBITDA. The ultimate. So we were hired to help advise on the sell side. They had an offer from 3G Capital. 3G Capital is like a large holding company. They own Burger King, RBI, have a huge stake in Kraft Heinz, a lot of other large companies. And so just a really cool transaction to be on the side of Hunter Douglas. Just really like it was one of the biggest building products deals of 2021. And just getting to interact with me being a more junior banker, I was kind of just David Sonnenberg, who was, kind of one of the main, one of the two sons, but he was kind of the lead on a lot of stuff. He would just call me on a Saturday and ask me to do things. And, but it was kind of cool having that connectivity with, a guy who's leading a company this large, global operations, and just getting to work with, people from their team around the world. I was connected to, their head of their Australia division, their head of Asia, head of South America, and just getting to really dive into how their operations were working across the world. Just super interesting deal to be a part of. And Hunter Douglas obviously being kind of the number one name out there. And in a big sense, like they were really a platform. Like they did hundreds of acquisitions over the years of other window coverings products companies. And so they were really a collection of all those brands. So it was another interesting dynamic. But the company sold for $7.1 billion. So really cool deal to be a part of, given the size and the dynamic as a young investment banker. And then I got to do some cool work with some other window companies, Associated Materials, another kind of platform of different brands, Preservation window brand, Allside, Gentech. These are all different window companies under the Associated Materials brand. So we helped them raise some money. And just got to do a number of other cool deals in the building products and chemical space while I was there. So
pausing where you're at there before we get into like entrepreneurship and where we're at today. Wanted to kind of plug in transition at this point. Looking back on that process, military to civilian life, kind of like recapping it and maybe giving pointers on how other listener service members who are in that kind of transition process, or even veterans, what your thoughts on how to make that a little bit simpler, easier, in your experience?
Yeah, I think once you kind of set on a particular industry that you want to break into, having a really crisp answer for interviews and when you're talking to people and like networking, coffee chats or whatever else it is, really crisp answer to why you want to be in that particular industry, and it's got to make sense and it should be genuine, So for me, it was just why did I want to be in investment banking? And then depending on the company that you want to work at, having a really crisp answer on why that company in particular too. So having both of those down, and just, really clearly defined, you're going to get asked that. You should get asked that stuff in any interview or any networking chat. And so making that super crisp, is really important. And then I think, just taking time to learn about that industry, in my case, investment banking, but then more specifically the companies I was applying to, researching, what kind of deals they had done recently, coming up with some detailed knowledge on, that particular company and understanding how they went to market. It can really help you to stand out. I'd interviewed, tons of folks, analysts and associates while I was in investment banking, and surprised at how many times, they just didn't have a good answer to, why why banking, or why that firm, or hadn't really researched the firm. So I think those can be real differentiators for veterans too. And I think a lot of times with veterans, when it comes to investment banking or another career like that, I think folks will assume that a veteran has some leadership ability that's kind of like a default bias maybe, and that they're generally tough and they're going to be able to tough it out in tougher situations. So you're kind of already getting some points for that, like going into the interview or the conversation. So if you can kind of fill the gap with some industry knowledge, or showing that you have some some technical knowledge in that given field, I think then it's kind of like a slam dunk for some people. Like, this guy is, he's the full package. He's got this leadership experience. We know, he or she is tough. They've toughed it out in these tough situations in the military, and they've got the technical skills. You can tell they're going to be able to get up to speed, in this role. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great answer. It's great, interview advice for really any industry, right? I mean, that certainly applies across the board. Cool. So leaning into built world, get into what you were doing in the back end there with investment banking, your involvement in the built world, and what you're doing today. I think you kind of laid the groundwork or the crumbs, whatever, for how you got into buying, and then also specifically Pella. Walk us through what that was like for you, process of purchasing a company to then run it and onwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of had developed this interest in building products. Specifically, I spent time at Credit Suisse and then ended up going to another firm, another investment bank, Raymond James, and the team I was involved on there was also building products and distribution focused, and that was more middle market focused, smaller companies, which was really even better experience for acquiring a smaller company of my own. Because smaller middle market companies have different problems than $5 billion Hunter Douglas. So that was a good experience, and allowed me to save some more money, because I plan to do this whole the self-funded search fund on my own, and with my own savings. So saved some more money, got some more great experience, fantastic team of bankers there. So learned even more about the building products and distribution sectors in those businesses. And it was kind of in late 2023, I was starting to put in the groundwork of, okay, this is X number of dollars that I want to have saved up to support my wife and I for a couple of years, or what could be a couple of years, for searching for a business, how long it might just take. And it was kind of like late in 2023, I had linked back up with Miles, who I mentioned earlier, an old friend from Infantry Officer School and Ranger School, and realized that he had gotten out of the Army, gone to business school, and spent time as a consultant and working at startups. And he wanted to do the exact same thing. He wanted to go do a self-funded search fund. We wanted to do just a regular search fund, but I convinced him to do a self-funded search, for different reasons. But we wanted to do the same thing. We both wanted to operate a company, acquire and operate a company together. So
that's a great story, by the way. I have to just have to plug that in there. That's pretty wild. Like, just how your lives just aligned throughout.
Yeah, just so awesome, because we had that shared experience, from Ranger School years ago, and then his corporate experience kind of complemented my finance experience as well. So just cool, and I wasn't planning on doing a partnered search, but we ended up teaming up, and it was cool. It was in January of really like January to the winter of 2024, we formed our search fund called Yona Group, and with the mission to go and acquire a small industrial services business, or building products distributor, something in distribution, industrials. He had a healthcare background, so that was also one of our focuses. but kind of had a clearly defined industry and a clearly defined size business we were looking for, roughly 1 to 5 million EBITDA, and checked a lot of other boxes. And we called our partnership Yona Group, which Mount Yona is kind of one of the main mountains that you train on in the mountain phase of Ranger School. And so we had that shared experience, obviously, and then named our search fund after it, which just ended up being a great story to tell business owners, as we sought out to meet business owners, and just tell our story. So yeah, we ended up kind of launching full time in the summer of 2024. We both left our jobs, so no more salary coming in. We were just
that takes a lot of guts. I respect that a lot.
Yeah. At the time, I was married, obviously, and my wife was pregnant, and she was going to give birth a few months later. So, a few months into the search, my son was born, and we didn't have a healthcare plan anymore. I had gotten off my company healthcare plan, so paid those costs for the delivery just out of pocket and stuff. But was so set on, if you don't pull the trigger on something like this, at a certain point, you don't say you're going to do it at a certain point and actually commit. You might never do it.
Right. Agreed.
It's never going to be a perfect time in life. So, we both committed. He was doing, great things at his startup, kind of chief of staff role, and I was a vice president in the investment bank at that time. But committed to leaving, our jobs and launched this search for a small business together. So, daily we were just spending time reaching out to business owners that were, that own companies in the profile that we were looking for, and having meetings, calls with business owners, flying out to businesses to go meet them in person and tour their facilities and whatnot. Ended up putting in an offer on one janitorial services company and kind of moved forward past the LOI stage where they accepted the offer. And it was a cool company. They serviced VA hospitals across the U.S. So we loved the mission. They had all these contracts with different VA hospitals. But you kind of go through the process and you do a little bit more due diligence, and then you discover that maybe some of the earnings aren't what you thought, or there's some other things you discover in diligence. And we had to make the tough decision where we had spent a couple months on the deal, focused on it. And we had to make the tough decision to let it go, to abandon the process and cancel the process out. So you get some of those, they call those broken deals, in a search fund, where, you're lucky if you don't spend too much money on, with accounting firms and law firms doing due diligence. But we were lucky in that sense. And then, kind of the end of the story is we discovered the Pella windows and doors independent distributor for the state of Connecticut and the New York Hudson Valley, kind of the New York side leading right up to West Point. It was up for sale. So the owner was retiring and didn't have a succession plan, and was kind of carving out that territory to be sold. And it was a unique process, trying to buy this business, because you had to get not only strike a deal with the seller, which is hard enough and complex enough to lay out all the terms that are acceptable for both sides, but Pella Corporate actually had to approve of the transaction, because this business is it's essentially the face of the Pella brand in this market. So Pella Corporation, they manufacture the windows and doors, and then these independent distributors, they sell, install, and service the windows and doors. And it's not like a franchise, because we're not paying royalty fees, but it's kind of more of a true independent exclusive distributor. But you're still selling like 95% plus Pella products. And you've got these these agreements in place, where it's a relationship, both ways. And so we had like 9 rounds of interviews with Pella Corporate, just to get approved. Finally finished flying out to Pella, Iowa, and going through a 6-round interview day. It was
Sounds like
it was intense.
this like 9-6 interview rounds is your lucky interview number.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. But we were lucky to get the, ultimately, raised money from investors, a
Mhm.
bank. There was a seller note component to the deal, where the seller was willing to, put some money out there and also roll some equity, into the new deal. So, a lot of confidence on the seller's part, in us, from Pella Corporate in us. And yeah, it took longer than expected, because
Mhm.
there's enough complexity to it. So it ended up taking us about 6 months, but we ultimately closed on the deal in April of this year, so April of 2025.
That's awesome.
Uh, and
Congrats.
we've been, yeah, thank you, yeah, no, huge for us. I mean, we ended up searching for, it was 9 months total, which is overall a great win. I mean, a lot
Sure.
of search fund folks will spend, could be 2 or more years and
Mhm.
sometimes not find anything. So if the fact that we put a concerted effort into 9 months of searching and got it done was a huge win.
Totally.
Um,
That's really
so
awesome.
yeah, we've
So,
been. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so I want to touch on, obviously you could finish what you were about to say as
Mhm.
well. I want to touch on translatable skills, right? I know you had mentioned them earlier, but I want to like specifically have a plug for it. Military to, built environment in particular, in your perspective, the many years on, building products, doors and windows, it seems to be a theme, which is awesome how you found that kind of niche.
Yeah, translatable skills from the military. I think why Miles and I both liked our partnership is there's this kind of foundation of leadership experiences
Mhm.
from being infantry officers in the Army. And I think you know great leaders are not born; they're made. That was what a senior NCO told me. In my first few months as a platoon leader, they're not great leaders aren't born; they're made. So you have to go having those experiences is a guy in your early 20s, being put in front of
Mhm.
a group of 40 soldiers. Um, it's unparalleled. I think
Yep.
and not even just not from a platoon leader's perspective, but also a squad leader or a team leader. A sergeant or a staff sergeant
Mhm.
getting that experience in the Army and in really trying circumstances too. A lot of times, whether it's forward deployed or just being in tough circumstances and being cold and hungry and having to lead folks,
Mhm.
you just learn so much about leadership and yourself and making mistakes, in leadership environments. That I think that's really it comes down to the people. It comes down that's what it is at the core. Um, Having those experiences from the Army, I think, has been the best skill, for us in running Pella right now.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, we're really only as good as our salespeople, our installation staff, our installers, all of the great folks we've got in the operations department, delivery, and customer service. And um, while it's very different, leading an Army platoon versus leading a group of window and door salesmen, there is a lot of overlap.
Mhm.
Um, and I think just having those experiences puts you in kind of a different level of maturity as
Mhm.
well that people respect. And while I'm not coming from directly from the window and door space. I think people see the translatable skills and ultimately got comfort, with us running the company.
Mhm.
Um, we really had little to no turnover this year
Awesome.
in all of the key staff, and it's a big team. We've got 30 plus folks that
Mhm.
work for our company directly. So to have little to no turnover is an accomplishment, and I think a vote of confidence in us.
Totally. Yeah. Well said. And that's awesome to hear. Excited for you. And again, congrats on that very quick turnaround, whereas you really put a lot on the line there, and I really respect that. That's absolutely not easy. So really cool to hear. This would bring us to the end of kind of, or at least, where you're at today in terms of civilian career. Anything I missed or that you want to add?
No, no. I think no. Just hopefully this is a good example of veterans interested in the building product space, and how it's. I think it's super cool to be able to step into a company like this,
Mm-hmm.
selling windows and doors, servicing windows and doors. Such a critical component to the home,
Mm-hmm.
and buildings too. We do a lot of commercial as well. Such critical components, and I just feel like. At least within the search world, there's not enough interest in building products.
Mm-hmm.
And with your show, I think I've seen how many veterans are out there in the built environment, in the building product space. So love to see that. But I think it's kind of neglected in the search fund world a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of surprising to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, you obviously found an awesome opportunity. Great to see it. And also, I loved seeing your kind of trajectory to where you're at today between, like London Business School, understanding of that search fund, and then into how you got investment banking side of the business that you're looking at now, which obviously gave you a great kind of understanding of how to run it on a financial perspective. Really, really cool to see that all string together. So to close out, we'll finish off with our final two questions. Start off with what your wellness practice looks like for you.
Yeah, wellness practice. It's I love exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I love fitness. So running as much as I can,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll say after some years in the infantry and just probably running too much over the years, I've got terrible knees and
Yeah.
flat feet. So I I try to do what I can, but I love jogging and running, weightlifting. I think it's important to be physically strong and have muscular strength and endurance. So I try to do that 5 days a week, when I can. Um, and I don't know, being an entrepreneur, in our first year here, it's I feel like I've not been as good about getting sleep, but always
Totally.
try to get, well, and also a young dad too, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Young dad on top of buying a company in the first year,
Yeah.
not hitting the sleep, hours of
Yeah.
sleep I like, but getting 7, 8 hours is great, when I
Mm-hmm.
can get it. So
Yeah.
yeah, fitness and sleep are the most important to me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I should have caveated the question too. Generally speaking, giving you absolute pass for at least a year. I mean, you just are hitting on all fronts there.
You
Uh,
too, you too.
yeah. Totally. Totally. Awesome. So we'll finish out with any book or books you'd like to recommend to the audience.
Yeah, a business book, Sam Walton, Made in America. The founder of Walmart,
Mm-hmm.
just his journey on starting Walmart, and kind of just all of that adversity that he encountered over the years in getting Walmart started, and just a really cool dude in general.
Mm-hmm.
Flew his own planes. He was a pilot and would fly planes like all around the South United States to visit his different stores. And just he was so dialed into the details and kind of being there at the stores, at his first stores, like with his people on the ground. It was just so important to him, and I feel like that's incredibly important for any company, or or even in the military too. Just
Yeah.
being there on the ground with your people, seeing what they're seeing. Not letting yourself sit in an office, or kind of be too far above
Yeah.
your people for too long. So Sam Walton, he was really dialed into his business, and I really
Mm-hmm.
respect that guy. So I'd say his biography was great.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, easy to understand why that's worthwhile to read for sure. Awesome. I know that you have a flight to catch. I think we're right perfectly on time. I appreciate you hanging in
Yeah,
there with me. Michael, thanks so much for jumping on, sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
yeah, Adam, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully, hopefully this is helpful to someone out there. And I'll just, if someone listened to this this whole podcast, please do reach out. Especially veterans, in the building product space would love to connect with anybody. So maybe you could put my LinkedIn in the show notes or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'll be in the show notes.
Great.
And as you put it, anyone who's listening who wants to reach out, please do. All to our listeners, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Michael, hang on with me. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.